Alright, this is going to be a video going over how to map with gears in mind. This is something that a lot of newer mappers struggle with. This video is going to assume that you have some amount of knowledge on driving with gears in mind and how that affects your driving lines. If you're not familiar with that, the first video I uploaded to this channel was all about driving in gears, so you should become familiar with that first, because otherwise you're not going to be able to map around them. And this video is going to assume that you have that knowledge, so I'll link that in the description. I'm also not going to be talking about ice, because ice is not my area of expertise. I don't know anything about ice at this point. I haven't played it much in years. So if you're looking for information on how to map ice, this is not going to help you there. I'm going to talk about basically all the other surfaces, though. Just as a reminder, you are able to see which gear you're in by the number of lights on the back of the car. So as I'm demonstrating the gears, you can look at that if you're not always able to follow the sound changes very accurately. That can kind of help you to get on the right track. When you're talking to other players or you're mapping, you will often hear people talk about good or bad gears, and perhaps a bad gear up or bad gear down, usually bad gear up. And this is something that can cause your map to be viewed as significantly worse in a lot of players' eyes, especially more skilled players. Now, this is something that you kind of have to keep in mind in mapping in order to avoid, and in general, this has to do with the concept of calculation, which is that your map should drive well both for players who are maybe newer to it, as well as when they start getting better at the map and driving faster lines. And as they push those faster lines, the map shouldn't kind of fall apart and become punishing them for going faster. That's kind of the main principle of calculation. And I should note that basically everything in this video is commonly accepted by skilled players and mappers. I'm not saying much here that is just like my own opinion. It's more the opinion of a lot of people. If you would like to disregard the opinion of most good players, you can do that, I guess, but I don't know why you clicked on this video then. Now, the way the gears work is different depending on your surface that you're on. So if you're on dirt, grass, or plastic, which I'll generally refer to as off-road in this video, they work one way. If you're on road, they work another way. I already mentioned that I'm not talking about ice, but it works completely differently on ice. And gearing up behaves differently than gearing down, at least in relation to mapping. Most of the bad gears that you hear about or see on maps are going to be people gearing up. So that's going from, say, gear 3 to gear 4, and there's a problem there. Less often with gearing down, say from gear 4 to gear 3. So I'll start off with the gear ups on the different surfaces, and then I'll go over gearing down. I have some examples over here, and I can show you pretty clearly with this part right here. So I'll just go into full screen. Alright, so I've got the sound turned up so you can hopefully hear it pretty well. You're going to be wanting to pay attention to the sound with gears. They're going to be your main tool for recognizing what is going on. So at the start here, you can hear that we're gearing up to 2, and then up to 3, and now we're in 3. We're staying in 3. So let's say I drive this turn badly. So I'm new to the map, maybe driving it like this. It's not very fast. Now I drive this turn. This turn works pretty well now. Now if you're mapping this and you're only driving this turn at this speed, you might not realize that there's a problem. But if I drive it faster, you can see that there was a noise. You could hear the gear made a weird noise, and the car slowed down a lot, and it geared back down to 3. That won't always happen. The last part won't always happen. You won't always gear back down to 3 when this occurs, but the principle remains roughly the same. We got a better exit out of this turn, so we had more speed. So when we got into this turn, we started gearing up, and then we got a big slowdown. So that probably lost us like 0.3 at least. Now that's a huge amount of time for someone who's grinding your map, and it's really something you want to avoid. And part of the reason why this is a problem is that the only real way as a player to get around it and drive the map normally again is to release. Now here, it's a relatively small release. You just press the release, or like, you stop pressing the accelerate button, I should say, very slightly right before, like that, and then it works. Now, with other turns, this can be more of a pain to do. Releasing might be very impractical. and it can overall, like, depending on the turn, this can range from a mild annoyance to, oh my god, this is ruining the map, I don't want to play it anymore. So that's kind of how calculation works with the gears. So this was an example of the fast players running into an issue, and the slower players maybe not. And the main way you're going to be able to recognize these is you're going to have to get better at driving your map so that you know when you're testing it that you're driving the fast lines, that you are actually experiencing the bad gear ups if they exist. And that can be kind of difficult sometimes. You can also ask more skilled players to test your map, and they will probably be able to recognize this relatively quickly when they're playing your map if it's a problem. So that was kind of the most common way you can have a bad gear on a map. And the reason why steering was the only sort of counterplay here to the gear as a player is because this was in a turn. Now, if this was a straight line, you would just like drive in a straight line, you'd get your gear up just fine, and then you'd be good. However, since this is an off-road turn, you are always sliding, and because of that, you will always get the bad gear if you gear up during the turn. There isn't really any room to drive in a straight line for a while in order to get the gear up. Now, there is a bit of nuance here where you'll hear people refer to no slides, which are kind of like this, if I can demonstrate. You can see I'm in no sliding there. If you're in a no slide like that on off-road, you're basically still sliding for the purposes of gears. This is kind of important to realize, so that doesn't really fix the problem either. So this straightening out is kind of the fastest way to deal with the gears if it is possible, and we can see that on a start like this. So that was just driving it really slowly. Try to get a few runs here. So you can see I am not steering as the gear changes, and I'm only steering when it doesn't change. So if we try steering over that gear change, let's just do it. See, at the end there I steered a lot during it, or not even a lot, it was only like 40% steering or something probably, and I got a big slowdown. You saw the other car went way ahead of me there at the end. So this is kind of how the gears work in general, and this is also why you almost never see starts like this. You'll almost, sorry, the stupid controller is deciding to turn the camera. It's really annoying. And this is also why you will almost never see starts like this on maps. Maps will almost always start on road, because people just don't really want to deal with this as mappers, or as drivers, really. It's usually not very fun. It can often become a start simulator if it's not done well. You just end up resetting at the beginning of the map over and over until you get the good gears. That isn't fun. People don't really like dealing with it. So usually you just start your map on road and you be done with that. And just don't have that problem. You don't have to think about it or deal with it. If you're really set on starting with the off-road start, you need to be very careful about it, let's say. So I've talked about starts. I've talked about how gears can be bad for good players. Now I will show an example of how the gears can be a problem for players who are maybe less skilled than the map is asking them to be. So if the map is really hard, they might be fairly good, but they could have this problem still, for example. Also, if you're playing in rounds, that asks you to have a level of consistency. So if we drive this turn, this works just fine for me. I'm in gear 4 the whole time. I get to the finish. Cool. Now let's say I gear down in this uphill. That's a really common thing. New players struggle with these uphills. I'm down to 3 now. And now I geared up to 4 in the turn. So as you can see, because we were slower, we have had the same problem that we had in the original turn. But this time, it's for a different reason. So this can kind of create a weird snowball where you gear down where you're not supposed to, and then you gear up where you're not supposed to, and then that gears you back down, and then in the following turn you're also having gear problems, and it can kind of just throw your whole run out of control, and it really sucks. So as a mapper, if you care about the players who are not on a perfect run on your map, the way you generally avoid this is there's basically 2 ways. So here's an example of one of them. Just release so I gear down here. We drive into road, and then we're gear up again on the road. So if you place some road, that gives you some space to gear up where you're not sliding. You're never sliding on road unless you're drifting. So that gives you plenty of nice space to gear up. And that's usually the solution to gears, is you leave more space on road to gear up. And to be clear, the solution here with this one would be basically leaving more space for the players to gear up that are faster. So we put this here, and then they have space to gear up to 4. Or you can leave less space than we did before, and that'll make sure that everyone stays in gear 3. So we either let the fast players gear up to gear 4 on the road, or we remove all the space to make sure that everyone's still at 3. And which one is easier to do really depends on the exact map that you're building on. You just want to make sure that whatever approach you take, you actually fix the problem and you test it thoroughly. So the other solution that I have to this uphill here is this turn. It's more dirt after, but as you can see, it's a dirt turn that is tight enough that you can drive it all in gear 3 without the map making you gear up. So this whole section of dirt, it works well in gear 4 and it works well in gear 3. So here we're in gear 4. Now, drive it again in gear 3. And we don't get any gear up. So that works as well. And then here you would just gear up on the road here afterwards. So gear ups on road work a little bit differently than the gear ups on the off-road surfaces, because usually you are either not sliding because you're just driving along, or you are drifting and so you're slowing down. And if you're slowing down, you're not going to be gearing up. So that fixes most problems. You don't usually have to deal with gears when you're mapping tech, but sometimes you do, because if you gear up right at the moment where you're starting your drift, you're kind of still accelerating, and that can give you the bad gear up right as you start your drift, and that can be a pretty big problem. So similar to the other ones, you just have to change the spacing so that the players either have more or less speed coming into the turn in order to avoid having that problem, which is kind of hard to demonstrate because it's hard to really create a turn that forces you to start your drift at that moment. It's really unusual, but I got it there. So you see I started my drift as the gear up happened. And we got the noise and the slowdown. And the solution here is usually just that you make your turn a block or 2 earlier or a block or 2 later, and that fixes the problem. Usually you don't need to do more than a block or so. Just adding that extra bit of spacing leaves players time to fully gear up, or it doesn't give them time to... Now, generally, when you're leaving space for players to gear up, you would prefer to do this on road rather than on an off-road surface. This makes the calculation a lot easier. You're less likely to screw it up by a significant amount. It usually feels nicer to drive. It is extremely common for dirt maps to contain little bits of road throughout the map to kind of mix up the driving and add a little bit of variety, allow you to do different transitions, and leave space for gear ups. To sort of show you one of the reasons why that is, I will use an example of a very old track of the day. So this map, the start, has you gearing up to 4 and then to 5 on the dirt, and it's overall a very fast dirt map. So let's watch the start. So if you didn't notice fully what happened there, we gear up to 4 there, and then 5 there. So, to refresh you on why this matters with driving, you will gear up sooner while you are sliding than if you are not sliding. And it is faster to SD rather than to not SD when you are in gear 4 and 5 on dirt and grass and plastic. Also a little bit in gear 3, but that's irrelevant for this. So what we're going to see Shadow do is SD right up to the point of gearing up, and then go into a no slide. So that's no slide is in both a no slide on dirt, as you commonly hear it, as well as just completely PF, so that there is no sliding at all. The gear up will happen, they will maintain their speed, and then they will continue doing an SD immediately after that. Repeat for the gear 5 change. So let's watch that. Now, this is something that is fairly difficult to do, and the beginning of this map ended up being a big start simulator because of it. The rest of the map was kind of noticeably easier than this, because this is a rather difficult thing to do, at least well. And part of why that is because the point at which you need to be doing your inputs in order to go straight and then go back to your SD inputs, it depends on the exact speed that you have. Now, most of the time in the game, you're doing your inputs in relation to where you are on the map. And your speed matters a little bit, but going slightly faster doesn't usually significantly change the timing. Going a lot faster will, but if you're going like barely faster, this kind of imperceptible speed difference on these gear ups, it can still have a noticeable impact on when you have to do your steering input. So it ends up being a very small window that you have to hit basically entirely on feel. Now, I'm not saying that you have to 100% avoid this every time, all the time on all maps, but it is something that is usually avoided by most mappers, and you'll generally see people leaving space to gear up on road most of the time instead of doing it on dirt. Both for this reason and because you might mistake a part of your map for being mostly a straight line, but it's actually faster to be turning there, and that can create a problem. Now, finally, we have gearing down. Now, if you're on dirt or grass, you basically never need to worry about gearing down. There's almost never a time where you have to be concerned about the act of gearing down itself being a problem. The exception to this would be in a sort of gear snowball situation like I demonstrated earlier, where it can cause knock-on problems later in the map, but that isn't necessarily related directly to the gear down itself. Or you're driving very slowly, you're going from, say, gear 4 to gear 3, but you're going to the bottom of gear 3, and then it might be difficult to not accidentally go into gear 2. And that could be kind of difficult. So that might be something that you want or don't want, but it really depends there on the exact map that you have set up, and it's hard to really give you clear rules for it in this video. But in general, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Gear downs are almost always something you don't need to care about on dirt and grass. Gearing down on plastic specifically can be a little weird sometimes, because the act of gearing down tends to slow you down and change your line a lot more than on dirt or grass. So that's maybe something to pay attention to if you're doing a gear down on plastic, especially if you're going from faster to very slow and you're making a very tight turn. But aside from that, plastic behaves almost identical to dirt and grass when it comes to gear stuff. On tech, gearing down is kind of finicky. I don't fully understand when it is good or bad myself. I can show an example of when it is a problem, and that will be on this map here. And it will be this upcoming drift. So the reason why this drift has issues is because the end result is you're going down from gear 4 to gear 3 in this turn. You always have to do that in order to make it around the corner, and sometimes you exit with way more speed than others. And I think this is because it depends on whether you're actively holding down the brake button as you gear down, but I'm not entirely certain. And some gear downs on road don't really have this problem. I don't really know if there's anyone who is super knowledgeable on this specifically. Maybe there's some old tech mappers that could leave a comment, but yeah. And usually this isn't as much of a problem with gearing down to 4 from gear 5 for some reason, so do with this information what you will. So for the end of this video, I'm going to show you a bit of a replay on a dirt map by Valve, and I will kind of narrate what's happening with the gears as we go. So we start up gearing to 3 before getting onto the dirt, and then this whole section is in 3. Gear up to 4 on the platform there, and then we're back on the dirt. And back to gear 3. Gear 4 on the road. And then here the map goes on for a little bit without changing the gear. And right there we geared down to 3. and we geared up to 4 on that half pipe landing before we got to the grass. And there we geared down to 3 again. But yeah, you can kind of see how these gear changes are implemented on the map. We're generally gearing down on the dirt and gearing up on the road. That tends to be how these dirt maps play, at least in this particular style. But you can see the notable thing is that Valve made sure that with this landing, for example, you're in gear 3, you're not gearing up to 4 on the grass here while you're trying to turn, you're gearing up to 4 while you're on the quarter pipe, which is road, so you don't get a slowdown. So I hope this video was helpful. Hopefully you are able to better understand the gears on your own maps. Thanks for watching, goodbye.